Hello, friends. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being patient with me. I don't even know. This week has been nuts. I'm music directing a show for the first time, so I am doing all of my music teaching in the next two weeks. And we had auditions, and it's been really awesome, and I really love it. I love theater, and this is a whole new perspective for me, to be teaching a little bit instead of on stage, and so it's really awesome. But as such, my brain is very full. So I apologize if I am a little behind on whatever I owe you as a teacher. I apologize if I my brain is a little stuck in some places this week. So thank you for being here. Hey, Shima, welcome. Yes, I just got your message. You were asking about finding different voices than your own. Yes. Maybe you want to expand on what you mean by that. Because, I mean, the best way to find a different voice than your own, hey, Sammy, the best way to find different voices, different tones than your own, in my experience, is to really expand, play around in different characters. Give yourself a little bit of experimentation time every day, and if that means trying to pretend like you're a vocal actor, a voice actor, and doing different character voices like Disney Princess or SpongeBob or I don't know, Patrick, I guess. You can not only just be silly and get out of your comfort zone and bypass that wall that comes up for us as adults that says you can't make any weird sounds, otherwise you're ridiculous. At least if you're not talking to a child, you know, a children. And the other benefit of that is, yay, I'm so glad you're here. The other benefit of that is learning and being present with it. So not just doing voices for doing voices' sake, but knowing how to make that voice. So you're getting scientific about it. Like if I'm going to do a SpongeBob voice, I may not know how I'm doing it, but I can do it and kind of go backwards and dissect it. So like SpongeBob is very, I'm terrible at SpongeBob, but it's very like what I notice is my back of my throat is very small. My larynx pops up a little bit, and I'm very far forward and nasal to make that really obnoxious SpongeBob voice sound. And so that tells me a couple things. That tells me that in order to have a brighter tone, I need to go further forward and more nasal in my voice, because that's what SpongeBob's voice is, very, very bright. Right? It's very far forward, very small pharynx space. And I can also put my hand on my larynx, and I can feel that it is going up as I'm about to make that sound. And so that tells me that in order to get this smaller voice, which I think it's meant to be because he's a sponge, right? He's very small. In order to get that smaller person sound, you need your larynx to come up a little bit in order for the pharynx to become smaller, so that it's a naturally higher sound. It's just like thinking about different instruments. Like the tuba is a really long, big, wide tube, right? All the way through. It's a very big tube, and it's very long. It's got, sometimes it goes around once or twice. It's just a bigger instrument. It's a literal bigger size, and that's why you can get those really low notes, because you have a bigger resonating chamber. And if you go down to a trombone, you have a little higher sound, and you have the I don't know, the thing that you move back and forth. I wish I knew official names of things. And the longer you go, I don't know if you know this about trombones, but the further you put it out, the lower it goes, the lower the sound goes. And the closer you bring it in, the higher the sound goes. So you're literally shortening and lengthening the tube. That's what it's called, the uvula, the thing that you move on the trombone. That's, oh, the thing in the back of your throat. Got it. Oh, yeah, that's what you're like, that's what you're shaking when you're trying to be SpongeBob. I get it. I was like, there's no way that thing is called the uvula. Timing. And so if you think about it that way, if you keep going down the spectrum, like a trumpet or a cornet is the very smallest tube, right? You have a very tiny tube that is not as long as the trombone or the tuba, and so you have a higher sound and you can go higher. And so if you think about your instrument in that way, of course, you may not have as big of a range as a tuba or a trombone, at least in order to have all of those possibilities, but you can notice what your larynx is doing as you make a low sound, right? And what you're doing is you're lengthening your instrument, right? The part that makes the sound is in your larynx. That's where your vocal folds live, and that's where they're vibrating and creating sound. They're resonating. And then the part that actually resonates and helps make the rest of that sound, otherwise it would just sound like buzzing, is your pharynx. And so if you lengthen that, you're creating a lower tone, as well as your vocal folds are shorter and thicker. So squat, thick vocal folds combined with very long pharynx equals lower note, and the opposite. I'm so glad. And this is all the things that you can discover just by playing around. Like, you don't have to know vocal anatomy, even though it's kind of fun to learn. I have a book, I don't know where it is right now, but it's like you know, like the anatomy coloring books. It's one that looks like that. I forget what it's called. I'll find it in a second. But it has pictures of all the parts of your vocal anatomy. It's pretty cool. And also there's many, many videos on YouTube. And then if you're trying to make a higher, brighter sound, like I was doing with SpongeBob, like this is kind of a perfect, like SpongeBob versus Patrick. So if you're going the opposite direction with SpongeBob, you can feel your larynx come up as you make that higher, brighter sound to shorten your pharynx and to make that higher sound. There's a lot of other factors that go in, so this is part of your pharynx too, right? Like the whole tube that leads to your sound is the part above your larynx. That includes also the back of your throat, the back of your mouth, the front of your mouth. Your tongue and your lips are a part of this passage, although those do less to change the actual tone, and they are more articulators. So they can help change vowel sounds and also affect your consonants and basically just help shape the rest of that sound. It's like the icing on the cake as the sound leaves your body. And so in order to so if say you want to be somewhere in between the spectrum of SpongeBob to Patrick, you want to be somewhere in the middle that doesn't sound like a cartoon character, all you have to do is just make smaller changes than that, right? So like we don't have to go Patrick or SpongeBob, but we can go somewhere in the middle and have it be a little more bright than my normal voice, or a little higher like a Disney princess. Hey, or like a little kid. I can go higher, but not quite SpongeBob. I'm like a look, and I can feel my larynx pulling up as I do that. And also, as I go up, my vocal folds are stretching and becoming thinner as they do that. So it's a combination of pharynx shape and vocal fold position and stretchiness. Hopefully that helps. And so you're pulling and tightening a little bit in order to make that little kid sound. And then maybe you don't even want to go that far, right? You pull back even from there. So we went SpongeBob, little kid, and then maybe just like Disney princess, like Ariel, right? It's definitely higher than my normal voice. Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? But it's not fully forward, right? So it's just a little lift in my larynx, a little bit of tightening. I'm on purpose hitting a higher pitch than I would sing it in my regular speaking voice, right? If I were to sing it just off the cuff, it'd be, look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? Because that's what feels normal in my speaking voice. But if I want to be a little more aerial, I'll go, look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? Didn't you think my collection's complete? And that's just a little higher pitch-wise, but also I'm changing the resonating chamber. I'm making it smaller in order to make a smaller, cuter sound, I guess. And so there's, of course, a spectrum, right? From Patrick to SpongeBob, you can be somewhere in the middle. So that's why I like to say Disney princess, to get people up into their head voice, because everybody knows, like, right? I'm Snow White. Someday my prince will come. And that is closing, shortening, lifting the larynx to make the whole pharynx smaller. So that's a very easy way to get people up in their high register if they've never done it or they don't do it very often. And it also helps them get further back into that breathy place, right? So this is the next part of the spectrum, is it's not just the length of the tube and the length of the vocal folds and the tightness of your vocal folds. It's also what's happening in between your vocal folds. We can go on this spectrum between, as Maddie Tarbox calls it, breathy to pressy. And so I would say SpongeBob is the most breathy, like very loud, very clear sound, not very breathy, because otherwise it'd be like, ah! And that's not exactly the sound we want for SpongeBob. Patrick, however, is quite breathy, right? He's not going, hey, SpongeBob. He's going, hey, SpongeBob. There's lots of air coming through that sound. And so when I'm doing that, I'm pulling it far back, and my body knows that that back feeling is gonna naturally pull my vocal folds apart. So normally they're vibrating like this. Right, these are your vocal folds. This is a terrible rendition because they're more like this. They're very flat. And so when you are in a more breathy coordination, you're pulling your vocal folds slightly apart. So they are not touching every single millisecond, whatever you call the thing smaller than a millisecond. They're not touching every moment. They are slightly apart so that more air can come through that middle channel, and they're still vibrating and they're still touching occasionally and making sound, but there's a lot of breath in that sound, right? So you have instead of ha, very different sounds, right? Same pitch wise, probably the same chord length, but a very different sound because you're adding more breath in versus just pressing them together hardcore. And a lot of times your body knows how to do this based on getting closer to a whisper versus trying to get the sound louder and out further from your body, which is why in order to get people more into their chest voice and to find a clearer, cleaner sound without all that breathiness, I just have them talk to a person that they are imagining across the street. Like, man, I need to turn my Instagram time limit off on Tuesdays. Hopefully you can still hear me. So in those moments, in order to get people into that chest voicey sound, I have them just talk to a person that they know. Like, hey, right? I'm sure I've had you do that if you've been in my class. Hey, you, right? And that is not a breathy sound. It's very closed. Hey, as opposed to hey. That's a more breathy sound. Same pitch, same size pharynx, and same chord length, but it's breathy versus breathy. Breathy versus breathy. Breathy versus breathy. So there's lots of different different axes that you can think about your voice on, which is why I like to think about it as this 3D box, because not only is it just about pitch anymore, right? It's about this, which can equal volume as well as chord closure, which often go together. But then there's also how short your larynx is. Like, that's also what goes into tone. It's not just how breathy or pressy you are or how high you are. It is the general tone of your voice. So like, I can sing a note as a Disney princess and as SpongeBob. It's the same literal note on a piano, but it is a very different texture, different tone, same pitch, different tone. And pitch and tone are very different things, and that's exactly what I've been talking about this whole time. So I can have the same pitch an infinite number of ways, which is why if a soprano sings the same note as a bass, it sounds very, very different. So like if I sang a note like ah, and a bass sang that same note, he'd be at the top of his range, which means for him it would feel like ah, right? It would probably have a very different tonal quality because his pharynx has become shorter, but my pharynx is quite long compared to my instrument. So it really has to do with a lot of different things. And so that's why I want you to play around, because when you play around, you are not stuck on the idea of, oh, that's a good sound or a bad sound, that's a right or a wrong sound. You're just exploring all of the nooks and crannies of your voice's possibilities, which means playing around with different tones on the same pitch, you know? So like if I were to sing that same note as a Disney princess in SpongeBob, it'd be like, oh, that's a very Snow White Disney princess. And I could even get more modern Disney princess like Elsa, a little more forward and a little stronger, more chord closure. And then I can go SpongeBob and notice that my larynx and everything's going to tighten up. Squidward, you know, terrible SpongeBob impression. But it's a very different tonal feeling. I'm on the same pitch. You wouldn't think it was, but I am. Ah is the same as ah, it's the same as ah. Very weird, right? Same pitch, different tone. So this is what I want you to play with, is these three different axes. Length of your pharynx, length of your chords, which equates to pitch, and then breathy to pressy. So hopefully that's helpful for you to think about these three things. If you don't want to think about all three, if that's too much, don't do it. Just think about one at a time, right? So just number one, I would start with just pitch. Honestly, if you haven't even worked on that, just start with that. So like find your normal voice, your speaking voice, and just change your pitch, trying to keep everything else the same. That's the part about being a scientist. If you're doing a science experiment, you can't be changing all of the variables. You have to just change the one. So in order to just focus on isolating the pitch changes, you have to be very careful about what size your pharynx is, which means being aware of where your larynx hangs out. So I can change the pitch a couple different ways, but a lot of times when I go low, my larynx wants to come down to help that sound go low, but I don't need to do that because I can make those low notes from a different pharynx shape as well, because it's not, your larynx movement is not a requirement for you to lower your pitch. Sometimes it is if you get closer to the extremes. Sometimes you're going to need a little larynx movement, but for example, I can go and two very different larynx movements. You can try that right now. So the further back, the more Patrick-y voice is, my larynx went way down. But the other one, barely moved at all. Teeny little movement down, but that's about it. Because I'm using a different coordination. I'm using a different tone, right? I'm using my speaky voice, which is a different tone than So play around with that. If you're trying to just isolate that pitch axis, see if you can keep your larynx in the same spot. There's a whole lineage of vocal teachers created from this one idea. I won't mention it because I don't want them to come after me. So it's really about keeping your larynx at the same, generally the same level. So you can go and my larynx hardly moved at all. But also, if you let it, if you want to change the tone, you can. So in that respect, if I want to stay on one note and just change the tone like I've been doing, I can go I'm feeling really dorky today. Same pitch, very different tones. right? I didn't move up in pitch. I didn't go, right? I just, changed my shape of my pharynx, didn't change how high I was singing, right? So, and you can do the same thing at any point in your range. And if you want to play with the breathy to pressy spectrum, it's going to be somewhat related to this forward to back kind of tone changing spectrum. It doesn't always have to be, but it's really hard to sing back here without being breathy. So sometimes it's necessary. It is somewhat related. So if I were to try just breathy to pressy on one note, it would be like Marilyn Monroe, and then slightly more forward, maybe Snow White, and then getting a little more Broadway now. And I'm not changing my tone. I'm not tightening or not making bigger or smaller my pharynx. I'm just thinking about breathy to pressy, and my tone is not changing very much, other than it's getting more breath in as I pull back and less breath in as I press forward. Okay, good. Hopefully you have some more to play with this week. And of course, we did the extremes. But as you're adding this back into your singing, as you're applying into real life, you're probably not going to end up singing a song like SpongeBob. I'm not going to judge you if you do. You do you. Have fun. Go sing the SpongeBob theme song at karaoke and have fun with it. And let me know how it feels and what you noticed about which axis you're moving on. But as you're applying this into songs and creating characters, I highly recommend listening to some musical theater, because those people are super adept at singing in character and adding character sounds into singing and not making it sound like a ridiculous cartoon character. I just watched, literally just before this, I was watching the NPR Tiny Desk of the Sweeney Todd cast. Annalee Ashford is a master at this, right? She, in one phrase, goes from ha to ha and all the way in between. Highly recommend watching, and she's hilarious. Like she has no problem changing her tone, but with a purpose, right? It's not just to do it, it's to be funny or to emphasize a word or to just stretch your imagination about who this person is. Also, voice actors who sing, like if you go watch a musical animated show like Steven Universe or something, those people are super really good at making these character voices feel like they belong in singing. It also helps you get out of the box that we put around ourselves, because sometimes when we make these silly voices, it feels like, oh, that could never be me. I could never sing like that in a song. But it's really good to practice getting outside of that in order to have more variety in your tone and what you can do. And that way, when you're singing a song, you can put more different variety of emotions within it. So your idea of what sounds like you starts to expand, because that's where we get ourselves into a lot of trouble. If we stick with what sounds like me, we don't ever let ourselves out of this teeny tiny little box that we've discovered, that we've decided is what I'm allowed to sound like. Otherwise, it's bad, or it's not me, or it's not real, or I'm faking it, or that's not singing, or it's not good enough, or it's off, or any of the other things that we tell ourselves about what our voice can be and what it should be. So that's my recommendation, is to allow yourself to play and then add some of these tones back into what you feel your voice is, so that you can start to expand your view and how you relate to your voice as a bigger section of what's possible. Because so many people think, oh, my speaking voice sounds like me, and when I go to sing in my head voice, that's not me. but it's all you. It's all your voice. It's just how you relate to it. So many male singers come and they hate their head voice because it sounds wrong. It sounds like a different person and they don't like it for whatever reason. Maybe some masculinity boundaries are involved in that, but who knows? Sometimes it has to do with just you've never heard your voice like that, and it's weird and it's hard to get used to. And so I always recommend hang out up here, talk like Mickey Mouse for a week so you get more used to it and it doesn't seem so crazy to have that sound come out of your mouth. So then you start to identify with all of the different parts of your voice, all angles and corners of this 3D box instead of just this part that you use every day when you're speaking. It's all you. None of this is not you. It's all you. Voice actors know this very well. Like, if you've ever gotten really obsessed with an animated TV show and then all of a sudden they switched up the voice actor on you, that's what I think of as like, this is identity, right? The old Elmo voice versus the new Elmo voice. I don't know if it's changed, but it's a very different feeling because it's two different voices interpretation of this character, but it doesn't mean one is wrong or their Elmo voice is not a part of them. It's still them and part of their voice, and it's their version of Elmo or their version of SpongeBob or their version of Mickey Mouse or whoever you're doing. That's, you know, same thing with musical theater. So many people have played Maria in Sound of Music, but none of them are doing it wrong. None of them are any less of themselves either while they're doing it, because they're playing their version, what their voice is as Maria. They're Maria in their voice. Hopefully this makes sense. Any questions before I go? I love this topic. Thank you for asking. It's really helpful because so many people come to voice lessons and they say, I don't like that part of my voice. Can I change it? I'm like, well, not really. But you can choose what parts to use and what parts not to use. Most of the time, however, we write off over half of our voice, over half of its possibilities, because we're judging it so hard, right? Because it doesn't sound like you, even though it's all you. It's just what character you want to play in that moment. So many, I know a couple of people whose speaking voice is very different than their singing voice, just because that's who they want to be, right? They talk up here and then they sing way down here. And it's really interesting to see how we relate to the voice. One of these days, I'm going to dig into the psychology of that, but today's not that day. Cool. Thank you for being here and listening and trying stuff out. I appreciate you very much. So yeah, my advice is play around, play in all the different corners of your voice. Go to the extreme for like 5 minutes, be SpongeBob. For the next 5 minutes, be Patrick. Discover what those extremes do for you and how you made them. Feel into your larynx. Notice what's happening in the rest of your pharynx. Notice what size this all is, what shape your mouth is, what kind of vowel you're doing. That's a thing I didn't cover in this, but vowel shape has a lot to do with your tone as well. I was doing it naturally, but I didn't mention it. Changing your vowel shapes, like you can make an E in many different iterations. So play with those as well. That's another fourth axis, I guess, to play on, even though it's related to tone. So yeah, play around. Play in the extremes, and that way it'll be much easier for you to find a place in the middle of the extremes when you actually want to apply it to whatever song you're working on, whether it's your own or somebody else's. Yeah. Happy last live of the year. Thank you for being here. Big announcements coming in the next month. I have a membership that's coming out for people who private lessons is a lot too much of a commitment. I have a solution for you. So if you're here and you're listening, stick around. I will be announcing that soonish. It will be something you can join month to month, and you can decide if it's working for you, and if it's not, cool, all good. I'm gonna do probably bonus, a couple bonus lessons for the first group of people who join, but after that it'll be discounted private sessions, if you remember. And yeah, it'll be very, very affordable, especially for this first group of people who join. So if that appeals to you and you've thought about private lessons and it's just not doable right now, stay here on this page. Look out for announcements happening very soon. I'm very busy right now, so I can't guarantee it will be in the next 3 weeks, but it will be happening soon. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your holiday season and Happy New Year. And I love you very much. And I'm always here if you have questions. My DMs are always open. I promise I will get to you as soon as possible. And if you want to just dive into my world now, there's some linkies up there. There's an ebook. You can download my warm-ups. You can just book a call with me straight up if you want to talk and see what parts of my which programs of mine work best for you. Vocal Magic is also launching again in the next 3 months at some point. And yeah, I'm super stoked. I love y'all. Have a lovely day.